a shout out to, this is again, this is like a part 2 I'm doing. So this is shout out to all my Twitter fans. Yes. I'm gonna go through them now. I'm gonna do a shout out to them. I got about 98 fans, but I had like 100 plus fans, but that's because I had Twitter for sort of like a long time, so like a few years, but anyway, I'm gonna shout out to Rob Perez. Shout out to you on Twitter. Shout out to Maria. Yes, shout out to her. Shout out to Kendra Perkins, who's my Twitter fan follower, and fans. Shout out to Lisam Mary. Shout out to Ben Steiner. Shout out to Kim. Shout out to Rachino Mo. Shout out to Seek Magazine. Shout out to Buddy. Shout out to JK. Shout out to the third team. Shout out to the Festival League. So that's like, yeah. So, and then shout out to Indie Films. Shout out to Gunther. Shout out to ACR Treatment, who follows me on Twitter. Shout out to Techmen. Shout out to Calling All Rice Queens. Shout out to Sneaker Film. Shout out to Alexander Grant. Shout out to Richard Bernard. Shout out to Anik. Shout out to a Nuts Counting fan, hey. Shout out to let's just scroll down. Hold on. Shout out to Villarreal. Shout out to one of my Twitter fans. Shout out to Active Gear League, Active Gear Large Exercise Mats / large yoga mats. Shout out to them. Shout out to Vidar. Shout out to Vidar Candles. Shout out to BBP Media. Shout out to WBP Media Midland. Shout out to them. Shout out to Blackberry News. Shout out to Lady Cryptonomic. Shout out to Lady Cryptonic. There we go. Shout out to them. Shout out to Creative Resources. Shout out to Creative Learning, who they follow me on Twitter. Shout out to I think a Twitter fan that says hard Brexit. Shout out to them for following me. Shout out to Irene, who follows me, and shout out to Mike Andrews. Shout out to Stan, who's my Twitter fan. Shout out to AMUK _ Daily Deals. Shout out to them. Shout out to Jaylene, Samantha. Shout out to Music TVs. Shout out to them. And shout out to Defeos Olemenye or Olewenini. So shout out to them. Shout out to Taylor Cleaning. Shout out to Mangaroka. Shout out to them. So shout out to World Traveling, who follows me. Shout out to Elena Fortain. Shout out to Olivia Nelly. Shout out to Hitchhiker Bay. Shout out to them. Shout out to LA Lakers Briefly. Okay. Shout out to Mehmet. Shout out to Mehmet Burke Ergin. Shout out to Warsaw Tax Force. Shout out to Coldra Cat. Shout out to Coldra Cat Marketing. Shout out to Jimmy Tooley. Shout out to Brooke NLC Studio. Shout out to Cousin D.East. Shout out to Brain Porter. Shout out to Sneakers. Shout out to Donovan Soul Smooth. Shout out to Donovan _ Soul Smooth. Shout out to Adam Wardley for, again, one of my Twitter fans. Shout out to
900 megabits per.
Shout out to Kuzi Gurney for being my Twitter fan. Shout out to Pigeon. Shout out to Taffy_Tiffy. Shout out to Atta Benny. Shout out to Olme, who's my Twitter, Twitter fan. Shout out to Turkey fans. I've got some, Turkey fans that are, they love me, man. They love me, man. My Turkish fans. So, shout out to my Turkish fans. And then, anyway, moving on to Ledrini Jans van Vuren. Shout out to her for being my Twitter fan. Shout out to Ironic Adam. Shout out to Harjinder. Shout out to Harjinder Singh Cook Reja. Shout out to you. Shout out to Meting Sent Tuich. Shout out to Bear. Shout out to Bear Hazat. See? Shout out to Ramzan Izoy. Shout out to Said Erkan. Shout out to Sonia Satra. Shout out to her. Shout out to Denz Yanhan brackets Bayart. Shout out to them. Shout out to Fur Art Gusser. Shout out to Rams Dave. Shout out to Ifukuk Demire. Shout out to them. Shout out to Monique Hornerberg. Shout out to her. Shout out to Gukuk. Shout out to Gooks Ozkana. Shout out to her. Shout out to Sarah. Shout out to Joa. Shout out to Jewel in that JEWELL. Shout out to Marie Busher for being my Twitter fan. Shout out to Emerald Vent. Shout out to Emerald Vent True. Shout out to Ellie. Shout out to shout out to Andrew Vincent. Shout out to Luxury Travel. Shout out to Timmy Tash. Shout out to Timmy Tosh. Shout out to T. Edwards 38. Shout out to Viral Midlands. Shout out to Inspiration Nation. Shout out to Daily Quotes 4K. Shout out to Rebecca Davy, who's my Twitter fan. Shout out to Midnight Voice. Shout out to Michael Johnson. Shout out to Lego Philia Education. Shout out to them. Shout out to Boxing Kingdom, who's my Twitter fan. Shout out to Connor Lines, who's my Twitter fan. Shout out to Lone Wolf, who's my Twitter fan. Shout out to Andy Hitkins,